Hey there, Savages. So the Fantasy Companion for Savage Worlds brought a ton of cool stuff. Me and Carl have talked a lot about it, but some of the really cool stuff is for the Arcane backgrounds and Arcane in general, and one of those things is called Prepared Powers. Play those dulcet tunes, Carl. Welcome back, Savages. This is Tabletop Tango. I'm your host, Eric. If you appreciate what we do here, please like, please subscribe. There's bubbles involved. Carl always talks about, I don't know what you do with them. You click them, you pop them. I won't judge, whatever you want to do. But yeah, we really appreciate any feedback, comments, all that good stuff. But what are we talking about today? Well, today we're talking about the prepared powers. I would say arcane mechanic, arcane system. This is kind of like one of three, I would say, kind of main arcane mechanics that were brought in with the Fantasy Companion. The other two being battle magic and ritual magic. Now, technically, ritual magic is a subset of the prepared powers system, but they're distinct enough that I think of them as kind of, they're different enough. But yeah, let's talk about prepared power. So what is that? So very basically, a prepared power is a power that a caster has prepared ahead of time by paying some monetary cost, and then they can cast it later on without paying any power points. But there's a lot more to it. So let's first talk about how you actually prepare a power. So the very, very initial thing you do is choose a power. Now, this has to be a power that you know or have access to. So, power that you know is a power that you've taken either with your initial Arcane Background selection or with the New Powers Edge. A power that you have access to, they're a little bit, wiggly wobbly on this. They include the Eldritch Inspiration Edge, which is a cool edge that the wizard gets that allows you to pretty much cast any power. But this can be just like a power that's on your Arcane Backgrounds list that you haven't selected with an edge or with the initial Arcane Background selection. So you choose that power, and then you choose all the modifiers that you want, like all the specific power modifiers, all the universal modifiers that you might want. There's also a special modifier that's just for prepared powers. That's a duration modifier. For 3 power points, you can increase the duration from rounds to minutes. And for 5 power points, you can increase it from rounds to a whole hour, which is pretty big. They're not very clear here on what you do with powers that are already in minutes. Like, say, Beast Friend, which is a 10-minute duration power. I personally would rule, what I think is the best way to do this is either have it cost 2 power points, kind of the difference between the minutes and the hour mod, or at the very least have it cost 3 power points. I think having a player use 5 power points to already make a power that's in the minutes to an hour just seems a little too harsh, because that's already kind of an advantage kind of built into the power as it is. So yeah, I would say either 2 or 3 power points. But anyways, yeah, you select all the modifiers that you want, and you want to get a total power amount at the very end of this. And so then you also include any existing limitations. Now, existing is very important here. You can't then change. You can't add or change the limitations that you already have. So as an example, say you had the invisibility power and you had an existing limitation that it only, you were like a shadow sorcerer or whatever, and it only worked when it was in shadows or nighttime. So you then couldn't prepare invisibility and put on, oh, I don't want that limitation, or I want to have it where it's like only humans are affected by the invisibility. And then you'll say you're about to go into like a human settlement or something. All right, so it has to be the existing limitation. So yeah, you get all the power points tallied up, and then you have to gather your components. And that's where the total amount of power points is important, because the cost of the components that you need to prepare a power is equal to 100 gold pieces times the amount of total power points. So, if at the end of the day, you have a 10 power point power with all the mods, it's going to cost 1,000 gold pieces to prepare it. So the components themselves are not just gold pieces. They're actually precious materials like silver or whatever, or, reagents or some type of whatever it is, or herbs and all that kind of stuff. You guys get it. And so you pay that amount. And this, there's actually a little bit of role playing here where you actually have to buy the materials. Now, I don't think it should be anything too rare and esoteric that you actually have to go on an adventure to get them. I think that's a little bit too harsh for something that's prepared powers have strong options, but they're not that powerful. So, at the very least, it should be something like a networking kind of deal in a city. Any main city should have these components that you need. So, some like persuasion rolls or some society, some type of knowledge roll about where you could find them in the city, something like that. A little bit of role playing is probably fine. You've collected them all, and then you actually prepare the power. Now, preparing the power, there's no rolls involved. It's just an amount of time based on the rank of the power. So it's 10 minutes per rank, so times the rank. So a novice power is 10 minutes, veteran power is 30 minutes, heroic is 40 minutes, etc. Once you've done that, then the power is prepared, is what's called as an anchor is created, and you've kind of prepared that power in your mind as it is. Once you want to use it, you actually have to have the anchor on you. They actually call that out. And then you just, as an action, you spend a penny. Now, it might not even have to be as an action. If you've used I can't remember the name of the universal mod. I think it's called the Quickened mod, where it allows you to cast it as a free action. I don't see anything wrong with that. If you use that mod, which is a 2 power point mod, then you could actually use this power as a free action. But regardless, you have to spend a penny to then activate your prepared power. It pretty much works as normal, like, it's the opposed roll, it's the normal arcane activation roll for whatever your power is. The only kind of difference here is that on a failure, you are able to spend a penny, they say, to kind of reroll to try again. On a critical failure, not only do you get backlash, but you lose the anchor completely. So all that gold you spend is just gone. On a success or a critical success, the normal kind of things of those happen. Critical success, a raise, the normal thing happens. But you also lose the anchor in that place. You don't retain the anchor over multiple activations. It's used up when you succeed. And then everything's normal. You pay maintenance as normal. All that, everything's normal. The only kind of difference here, there's 2 things here. One is, I'm not really sure, they don't really talk about what happens if you've failed, but you say either don't want to or don't have a Benny that you want to do to try to re-roll it. I personally would rule that it shouldn't use up the anchor. If they don't have a Benny and they want to use it at a later time, or like they have a Benny but they don't want to use it and they want to use it at a later time, because Bennies are valuable, right? They're not just for PowerPoints. They're used for a lot of things. I'll talk about that later, but I think at the very least, it should just be a wasted action. You shouldn't have the anchor just be dissolved because they just failed and not a critical fail. That's my own personal belief. Finally, there's one final section here where they talk about that you can only attain a single power at a time, retaining meaning in your mind. As a free action at any time, you can actually dismiss the retained power, the retained prepared power at any time. And but they don't really talk about how they do talk about that you can reuse that anchor at a later time, with everything the same. But they don't talk about how you actually do that. I would say, you could just say it's an action to kind of reorient yourself to an anchor. Personally, I probably would go with that. They have to use the same amount of time it took to prepare the power to begin with, like, the 10 minutes times rank. I think that's a very good way of maybe stopping any kind of abuse. If somebody has a bunch of anchors and they could just reorient back to back for whatever reason, but at the very least, maybe make it 10 minutes. Even if you did it as an action, I don't see it as that game breaking. But yeah, they don't talk about it, so there has to be something there, at least an action, 10 minutes, or 10 minutes time, the rank of the power. And then one final thing to talk about here, where there's 2 times they talk about the anchor, but they don't actually talk about what the anchor is. Now, when we see that they talk about the anchor, you have to have it on you, like you could lose it or leave it behind. And they also talk about that you could reuse the anchor later. It seems to me that the anchor is some type of maybe physical object, like once you've created it, it's like a tiny little talisman or a little bead, something. It seems like logically that would have to be some type of physical object if you can then, not have it on you. So yeah, so that's the only thing with the anchor. So that's the whole way that you go with how it actually works. But let's actually talk about now why you want to do this. So ultimately, prepared powers have 2 advantages. They don't cost power points to cast, and they have that increased duration mod, which you can't do anywhere else. Nowhere else can you make a power that's in the rounds lasts an hour. Now, there's a really, really big caveat here in that it does cost a Benny to cast, and we all know that a Benny is worth 5 power points. At any time, you can spend a Benny and get back 5 power points. So in reality, it does cost 5 power points to use a prepared power. So when we're looking at this optimally, you want to have a paired power that costs more than 5 power points. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to spend all that gold. So personally, I would say that you don't want to do this for a power that's less than, 8 power points. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. The only reason you would is if you really, really want that increased duration for whatever reason. So that's the only thing I can think of. But, ideally, you want to go have a power that costs over, with all the mods, costs over 5 power points. And there's a little bit of give and take here that like you want to have it over the 5 power points, but if you have like a 20-point power, that's going to cost 2,000 golds. So that's going to cost a lot of money, and you might not have a lot of money. So there's a weird kind of like give and take here with how you want to balance this out. So the monetary cost is a huge factor, and it does kind of prohibit how many times you do this. And I would say that because it costs so much gold, you don't want to use this on powers that like are opposed or resisted outright. Powers that work and then maybe resisted at later rounds, or powers that are like buffs, things like that. Those are really the ones you want to focus on for preparing powers. You don't want to do this on a power that's opposed. Like, it's just not worth the risk of all that gold and the Benny that it costs to do it. It's just really not worth the risk at all. So that's my opinion, obviously. So what are the best uses? So for me, the best uses is as a contingency button, or like the oh shit power, something that has a significant and immediate impact on the party situation or the battlefield, that kind of gets your party or you out of trouble. And also that should be very flexible in its application. You don't want something that's too niche, that is only going to work in like a very, small scenarios. You want to have something that can be applied to many different scenarios that can get you out of trouble or have a really big impact on a combat or on a situation. Finally, you could use it on if its kind of efficacy is like greatly increased by having that duration mod, then that's another reason why you might want to prepare a power. Because it's very important to note that maintaining powers are going to maintain it at that increased duration. So if you have something at an hour, then it's going to be a lot cheaper. Then you can have it for a lot, many hours, because you can afford to, keep maintaining that power. So that's another thing to kind of keep in your mind when you're looking at what powers I want to prepare for myself. There's an interesting overlap here with arcane devices. Some of the strengths of arcane devices, you're able to like give it to your allies and they can be off doing stuff. And with this increased duration that you can have, you can really have certain powers that before you maybe wouldn't have been able to, like, when they need to use it, you wouldn't have been able to, if you don't have an arcane device, right? They can be, if it's lasting for hours, then they can be off somewhere else doing their thing. And I'll talk about that in my examples. So leading to that, let's talk about some of my best power picks. This is not an exhaustive list. These are just some of the powers that I would prepare that I think are, like I said, the two things above that, the increased duration and they're flexible powers that can get you out of a lot of situations. So very first of my power picks here is Barrier. And we're talking about fully modded Barrier with a duration to minutes. This is an excellent panic button that can be used in combat. It can be used in, kind of more of a social role-playing exploration mode, like you're being chased by guards in the city or like during a chase, right? You've spent power points already. It's excellent in combat. If it's a long combat and there's reinforcements that come in, or you just need to get away, Barrier's one of the best power. It's just so flexible in its application. With the shaped mod, you can use it to protect like an NPC, an extra that might have been taking some damage, whatever. So yeah, Barrier's an excellent one for that panic button. Very flexible in a ton of different situations. I love Barrier anyways, and it's really good here as prepared power. Moving on to, I'm going to talk about Burrow and Fly. Now here is not one that's good as a contingency power, really. I mean, it can be used, but here is where I talked about where a power's efficacy is really increased because of this duration. And Fly and Burrow, and Fly especially because it's expensive to maintain, that if you have it for that hour duration, I mean, as an exploration, for exploration, if you need to like explore some type where flight is really good, or for some type of infiltration or exploration where Burrow, I love Burrow. If anybody's ever seen me talk about it, it's excellent for that hour-long duration and very efficient to maintain. And it could also be used for, multi-combat scenarios. I mean, if you do fly, and with the additional recipients and on your party, and you have it in the hour, if you're in a dungeon and you have like combats every once in a while and you're maintaining it, you can have it up for multiple combats, and flight is extremely powerful for people to have. So look at that if ahead of time, if you're going into like a big dungeon and powerful dungeon, and flight is a very good buff to have on that hour duration. Moving on to disguise, with the added recipients and increasing that duration to an hour, another really, really good getaway button here. No, not in combat, but really good, like I said before, with like barrier, like, you've a faux pas in the king's room when he sends your guards after you, or whatever, you got caught stealing. It's just an excellent, excellent getaway button for that. It's really, really good for infiltration. Again, if you're infiltrating a warren or like a goblin fort or whatever, you can disguise yourself as goblins and have it on for that hour. Then you and your party, don't break the party, separate the party, but split the party, but they can be split up and they can be doing stuff as goblins. So I think disguise is a really, really flexible one. Maybe not so much in combat, but a really, really flexible contingency power. Moving on to dispel. Now you really want the anti-magic field mega mod and the multi-powers mod. These are the big wins here. And oh my god, this could be game-changing against a powerful magical adversary like a big bad or a lieutenant or an elite, whatever it is. If you're facing magical opponents, this would be such a good thing to have in your back pocket. I mean, really, really powerful option just to kind of blast out that anti-magic field and just nullify all their stuff. So, hugely powerful as long as that's the kind of like adversaries you're facing. Moving on to healing, fully buffed with the mega mod, mass healing mod. Do I even need to describe this? I mean, this is mainly a combat thing, but this is extremely good to have in your back pocket. It's a couple rounds into combat. I've spent a lot of power points. My friends just took a huge AoE damage blast, whatever it is. Use this and bam, they're healed. So I don't have to talk about it, right? Okay, moving on to invisibility. Fully buffed with the recipients in the hour duration. Again, this is pretty much just like disguise. This is just a more expensive version. Very powerful for social situations, very important, very powerful for infiltration missions. But this can also be used as an in-combat buff, so it's kind of like disguise, but it's more flexible. It's just more expensive. So between those two, it's just whether we want to spend the money on having that increased cost, and then maintaining it is also going to be more expensive. So they just have that. There's pros and cons to those. But yeah, moving on to a little bit of a wild card here, but one I really, really like is the new Summon X powers. A powerful summon like a seasoned or veteran creature, and this is like summon animal, summon monster, summon undead. Veteran or seasoned creature here with the additional creatures mod, which is the mega mod that they have for those summon powers, enabling you to have like a bunch of the same powerful creatures out at a time. I mean, this is also very flexible. It can be used in a lot of different ways. I mean, in combat, obviously, as like a meat wall, a living meat wall, for just to turn the tide of combat in the like final rounds of combat. I mean, doing a lot of damage. It's really good as a distraction. I imagine like, again, those getaway scenarios, and you're in that same one where the king is mad at you and you suddenly summon 5 stegosauruses. That's a pretty big distraction. So yeah, Summon X, hugely powerful here. Finally, we move on to teleport with, of course, the greater teleport, which enables you to do it more than just inside, enables you to do it like 100 miles and up, based on how many rounds you do it for. And now you either want to have the additional recipients or gate mod here. Personally, I like the gate mod here better. It's much more flexible in its application. With additional recipients, you already have to know ahead of time, it's my party. With gate, this can include villagers that you need to transport, or, an NPC that you need to do, or whatever, right? Like, so maybe guys need to like move a bunch of goods back and forth between something. So gate here is just much more flexible. The drawback is that enemies could use it, but, you're able to stop a power at any time as a free action. So dismiss a power. So there's nothing stopping you from using it and then dismissing it before an enemy can do it. So I just like gate here better because it's very, very flexible, and teleport is the ultimate get out of dodge, and it can be used for a lot of reasons. Like, maybe you have all your power points, but you need to we need to get back to our base, or to this to the throne room because we heard about an attack. But I don't want to spend all my power points on teleport, this like really expensive teleport with, gate, and it's really far away, that I can use this, and then I can have all my power points going into a combat. So a really powerful option. Finally, time stop. I mean, we talked about it in the new powers video, and, this is an interesting one because it's only 10 power points. There's no mods. The duration here, the duration mod, I wouldn't say makes sense. Like, you can't really increase. It's a 1d4 plus 1 rounds. I mean, technically, I guess there's nothing here in the rules saying you couldn't do minutes or an hour, but obviously that's not the intention of the power. I would say rules as intended, you cannot use that for the duration mod. It just doesn't make sense. So You know, the mods, the duration is not listed in the description of the power itself. It's in this the flavor text summary of it. So yeah, I would say you can't use it with the duration. That's just too broken. But you know, time stop, really powerful option in combat. I could see you preparing this, so you know you're saving those 5 power points to you know, because of the Benny. To then buff yourself up a lot, and that's a good savings of power points. But you know, out of combat, at the end of combat, there's so many. Time stop is extremely flexible. You know, in a variety of situations, having multiple rounds, even outside of combat, right? Just having those like quote unquote extra turns where you can move, you know, run fully and do, you know, pick up stuff, do all that stuff. As long as you're not touching people, you know, interacting with them, you can do a lot of stuff. So time stop is an extremely powerful option. All right, that almost could be the end, but there's one more thing I want to talk about here, and that's scrolls. Now, scrolls, I might talk about this in a later video when I talk about magic items, but scrolls are an extremely powerful option, a magic item to have for a lot of niche powers. And if you have the artificer edge, so you are a crafter, then scrolls can actually be a alternative to preparing powers. And actually a cheaper option is what I mean. Now there's a little bit of weirdness here, but you know, outside of the duration mod that prepared powers allows, scrolls can be cheaper in a lot of ways. Now this really depends on how your GM runs crafting. Now crafting, like all systems I've ever read, crafting is a little bit lackluster. In this case, I like what they put in, but there's some parts where they're not very clear about things. And one of those is, how much does it actually cost to craft something? When you read the rules, they talk about it costs 50% of the cost of the item to begin crafting, but nowhere do they talk about then at the end of crafting, you have to pay the rest up to the value of the item. So it's whether your GM, you know, rules that it's 50% of the item to craft, or it's the full amount. You know, you also have to rent the workshop to do it. It's like 100 gold pieces for a normal workshop, standard workshop. So to me, it never made sense that you would do the full cost of the item plus that. I mean, why not just then buy the item? Unless it's, you know, that's always the deal with crafting, right? It's either it's bad or it's better than and it's broken, whatever. But so depending on if your GM rules or you as a game master rules that it's 50% or the full amount. If it's 50%, then novice powers are going to be cheaper than preparing them. Again, as long as you don't want the duration mod, it's cheaper for you to actually create a scroll. And you know, monetarily wise, it's cheaper as a novice power, and it's the same as a seasoned power. I mean, again, minus the cost of renting the workshop. So if you're doing this without renting a workshop, like with just an artificer's bag or whatever they call it, or you have access to it and you don't have to pay rent, then season would be the same. And the advantage of scrolls is you don't have to pay the Benny to activate them. You just do it as an action. And anybody can do it. I mean, it just costs a smarts roll or your arcane skill roll. So these could also be for powers that that you actually haven't prepared before. So, you know, buying a scroll, again, a novice level 1 would be the same cost as would be cheaper than preparing a power. So even if you're not a crafter, but yeah, this is for if it's the full cost to either craft or you're buying it. And if your GM rules that it's half the cost, then up to a veteran is actually cheaper. So novice, seasoned, and veteran powers will be cheaper than preparing the power. And then heroic's going to be the same cost, again, with the whole thing with renting it. So either crafting a scroll or buying a scroll might be better, but it just depends on the rank and how your GM rules crafting. So yeah, that was a lot, but that's all there is to prepared powers. Again, if you like the kind of content that we do, please like and subscribe. Please comment, whether good or bad. We love hearing from people. You can check out we actually have an audio podcast called Mastering the RPG with our friend James from Down Under, an excellent guy, really cool guy that's a professional game master. We talk about generic role-playing stuff, mostly hints for game masters, but we talk about some player stuff. But yeah, please like and subscribe, and this is Tabletop Tango. I've been Eric. Happy gaming.